welcome to another conversation in the FM Expert series. Today I'm joined by Tony Houlihan. Tony, thank you very much for doing this with me.
Afternoon.
Afternoon. Tony has been working in the FM sector, particularly around procurement, for the last 20 years, and is today going to talk to us about really attracting people into the sector with of course, with a slant on procurement. And I'll be honest, it's not an area that I'm a huge expert in. So I said to Tony, I've got my pen ready, and I'm gonna learn a lot here. So Tony, I shall hand over to you. Thank you.
No pressure. Thanks a lot for having me, Beth.
That's my pleasure.
I've been watching the series for quite some time, and more than happy to get involved.
Brilliant.
So what I wanted to sort of discuss today was some of the challenges and some of the sort of benefits of working in FM procurement and dealing with the companies that I'm dealing with at the minute. Just some observations,
Brilliant.
Hopefully helping people who are considering FM procurement.
Brilliant.
Hopefully helping some companies that may be looking for talent, and see if we can, share some top tips in terms of things that I think people should do.
Yeah.
Just to give you a bit of background on me, I've been doing FM procurement, as you said, for a million years. Or what it feels like.
Feels like it, yeah.
Yeah. I've worked client side. I've worked for an FM provider. I'm currently working for a consultancy, and I also work for a recruitment business that have got a niche in FM procurement. So I've been around the block a bit.
Yeah.
And I've started from fairly junior level to doing some senior roles. So first of all, I guess FM procurement. Why would people want to buy FM?
Yeah.
I think there's a very big misconception that FM procurement is just about buying cleaning services. I feel like it's very sort of misunderstood in terms of the complexity and how interesting it can actually be as a role.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've worked for some really interesting businesses. Things like television, things like betting shops. Big corporate estates. There's a massive variety within FM, and as a procurement person, I feel like you get exposure to lots of different things, buying services that you generally wouldn't get if you were just buying products.
Yeah.
And I like that FM is a little less tangible. Some of it is around different stakeholders' perceptions and things like that. And I just think it's a really good niche to get in. But I feel like at the moment, I think the sector is struggling from a bit of no one really understands what it is. And no one really crosses into it that easily. But I feel like there's lots of opportunities for people to do that.
Do you not think, though, the nobody really knows what it is thing, we've been saying that for 20 plus years, that it's a misunderstood profession. People don't get it. I wonder how long we can keep on saying that. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think is that part of the issue that people don't get it explained to them properly when they're in education. It's not classed as necessarily a standard career route. Lots of people falling into FM, falling into procurement.
Yeah.
Is that because people don't see it as that exciting? Because it is at the end of the day looking after buildings, it is cleaning.
Could there be anything more exciting than looking after buildings? I mean, you're talking to the wrong person. But no, I get it. And the issue is it's not talked about full stop, is it? Let alone not talked about properly. It's just not, like you say, it's not a profession that people particularly know about, is it?
Yeah, and hopefully we can have a chat about a couple of those things today. So I started in procurement because I liked dealing with people. I like doing deals. I like fixing problems. So procurement for me was a sort of natural fit. I feel like getting people excited about procurement, particularly in FM. I think there's lots of different ways people can migrate into procurement. They don't necessarily have to be career procurement people. They can come across from sort of help desk roles, contract support, actually working on the floor as facilities managers and things like that. Some people I know that where FMs have gone on to be great FM procurement people.
Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't ever thought about that. So let's say somebody watching this, like you say, perhaps doing an FM help desk role or something, thinking, where do I want, having watched some of these videos, thinking, where do I want my career to go? Probably has thought about being an FM,
Yes.
not even considered FM procurement. So why would they move into FM procurement? Sell it to us, Tony.
I feel like there's a lot of transferable skills actually, because they're
Yeah.
organizing things, they're dealing with suppliers and subcontractors already.
Yeah.
They've got a very good understanding, if they've spent a bit of time on a help desk or contract support, understanding what the problems are on the sites, on the contracts. So they really appreciate what they need from their FM supply chain in terms of responsiveness, in terms of quality, in terms of closing the loop, in terms of service.
Yeah, that's really interesting. They've sort of seen the warts and all side, haven't they, to see what isn't working and how it could be done better.
Exactly, because and we used to say it quite a lot to our teams when I was head of procurement for a big FM provider. We were only as strong as our sort of weakest link in the supply chain. We had some very diverse contracts. They were all across the country, some really weird and wonderful places and some really weird and wonderful buildings. And sometimes it's a challenge to get the right type of supplier or subcontractor in places like that. So you've got to really work with your supply chain and try and improve them and bring them up to your standards.
Oh, I like this. I think it's really interesting. I think it's good because we haven't had a conversation around this and looking at some of the, some of perhaps the less considered, job roles within FM. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. You've given me lots of food for thought already. You were talking about at the beginning as well some of the challenges and benefits of working in FM procurement. So bring that to life for us.
So I think we'll start with the challenges,
Okay.
I guess. So FM procurement is, as I said, very diverse.
Yeah.
Even within one company's estate, you can have a variety of different environments. It can be logistics, it can be offices, it can be labs, it can be power stations. All of those need slightly different suppliers, need different approaches, and it is very fragmented by the nature of it, because you've got hundreds of suppliers and subcontractors maybe just supplying one contract. They might be completely different to another contract within another part of the business. So appreciating that you maybe not everyone's biggest customer, knowing that you've got to build those relationships with a lot of the companies who are SMEs that are specialists, but not necessarily big corporates with big offices and processes that fit into what you've promised to your client. So a lot of the challenges are sort of translating that in terms of what the client wants is up here and what you guys are actually delivering is a great technical service, but joining them together to get that to work cohesively is quite a challenge at times.
Yeah.
I feel
sorry.
Another challenge is possibly, the industry is renowned for being very price focused. The main FM companies don't make huge margins, and that's often squeezed down the supply chain in terms of both rates and payment terms. And, that's very difficult for some of them small businesses to sustain.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's not going to get any easier, is it?
No, it's still very challenging out there. People are obviously dealing with rising costs, both from labour, materials, equipment.
Yeah.
And there's only so many things and costs people in the supply chain can absorb.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're seeing a reasonable amount of consolidation across the sector at the minute, from the big players, some of the big mergers that have happened, to some of the sort of mid-range players hoovering up either competitors or people slightly further down their supply chains. So sort of vertical integration, there's quite a lot of that going on at the moment. And people adding on additional service lines. So M&E contractors that are adding drainage and things like that. There's quite a lot of that stuff going on at the minute, and that's all to drive more efficiency. People trying to, leverage their reputations to expand and sort of try and keep growing.
Yeah, it's always been that whole thing about, you've got a brilliant relationship, the client trusts you, you're delivering a fantastic service, the client says, what else can you do? And you think, oh, what else can we do? And then you get into, perhaps you sort of diversify into something that isn't necessarily your niche, and then the performance starts falling. And it's just been something we've seen time and time again, hasn't it? It doesn't always happen like that, but it is a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of, especially in the big sort of TFM contracts and integrated services contracts, there's this tendency to try and keep growing with an existing client, but you end up taking things on that aren't your speciality, that you don't have enough specialism at the centre or within the account to sort of try and improve that for the service. So you just end up being a bill payer to an external company.
Yeah, no, exactly. You've given us some challenges. Let's talk about some benefits.
So there's a huge amount of benefit. Obviously, I'm biased, I would say that.
Yeah.
When I look across the procurement sector in general at the minute, people that are specialising are commanding better rates. They've also got, I think, better long-term prospects in terms of it's all well and good having a generalist view, but the big roles, category manager, sort of category director upwards, they're really commanding quite a lot more at the minute in terms of packages against more general roles.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I think FM at the minute, it's an essential service. We used to joke, one of the places I used to work, that we were the fourth emergency service.
Yeah.
We were always at the end of the phone for whatever happened. Everyone needs it. Everyone's still operating their estates. People are changing the sort of building requirements in terms of where maybe the size and shape of the portfolio, but they still need buildings to do whatever it is they're doing. I feel like it's still a growing market, but I feel like we've got this sort of gap in terms of trying to attract people in at the beginning, which is, one of the things that we're trying to address at the minute.
Yeah. I'll come back to the beginning. I'm just scribbling frantically notes because it's really interesting. But if you, in your experience, if you think of people who you speak to as fellow FM procurement experts, how many of them, and this is a crude percentage, how many of them would you say have been subject matter experts? So let's say somebody focuses on hard services. How many of them have had that sort of operational experience and then moved into procurement versus having just started in procurement and maybe gone into that niche area? That makes sense as a question.
Yeah, of course it does. I'd say a lot more people come in via the procurement route.
Yeah.
And then find their niche.
Yeah. Okay.
There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But having that operational expertise of actually being on the sites, being on the tools, I do think is a massive benefit. And engineers, the way they work and things like that tend to end up in more operational roles. But some of the best commercial and sort of account directors and stuff like that have been engineers, and they could have quite easily gone into procurement had someone thought about that being a good skill set to sort of move them sideways into, or move them up even.
This conversation, Tony, might do it. This conversation might do it. So let's assume either you've got perhaps somebody junior who's thinking, I hadn't even thought about it, and you've whet their appetite, or let's say we've got somebody who has been doing an operational role, whether like you say in a specific niche or more of as a generalist, and wants to move into procurement. How can they best do that move? How can they best get into FM procurement?
So I think if they were working for an FM provider, let's use that as an example. It's possibly one of the easiest ones. A lot of those sort of organizations have talent programs. They have upskilling as part of the sort of annual review process.
Yeah.
Offering to, go and support mobilizations, working with the supply chain people. Quite a few of my good buyers back in the day got spotted quite quickly when we were out supporting mobilizations and those sort of things as people that could add a lot of value.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one route. Any other things that would be, I mean, do they have to have a qualification? I guess that helps, but is it essential?
So SIPS is still
Yeah.
probably the industry standard for
Yeah.
procurement people. There's not a lot of other sort of qualifications. There's different routes now, so you can do an MVQ.
Yep.
As well as going to college like I did back in the day and doing it on the sort of weekend release type thing.
Yeah.
I do feel that's a benefit, depending on what other skills and experience they've got. I
Yeah.
do feel like the foundation stuff is very interesting.
Yeah.
But there's opportunities to potentially ask to shadow people,
Yep.
to do placements, to support certain projects as
Yep.
the operational leads. A lot of the projects we did when I was working at Interserve, we would bring in people from the business that were doing operational roles to support us as our stakeholders, because they knew on site, they knew what the problems were with the subcontractors that we had on the system, and they were the best people to talk to and sort of engage, because then when you put in your recommendations forward, you've engaged the operation fully. So lots of opportunities for engagement with procurement and supply chain. I think they've just got to be proactive in that approach and try and put themselves out there.
Yeah, definitely. SIPS is an interesting website because obviously it's locked down for members to access certain information, but even without a membership, they've got brilliant resources on their website. They've got downloadable resources, downloadable guides. They've got things on. One of the things I always talk about is a key skill that everyone in FM should have, certainly if you're in FM procurement, is of course negotiation. And SIPS, for example, have got free webinars you can access on negotiation. There's all sorts of other bits and pieces. So I think you're right. I think, and even things like negotiation skills, just YouTube would help. But these are then skills you will use every time you go and buy a car, or when you're, do you know what I mean? And doing any kind of big expense, the skills and the knowledge is there, So,
yeah, absolutely. There's lots of resources. I mean, there's some great books on things like negotiation, and obviously great content online. There's also SIPS as well as the websites and stuff. There's the branch network, so they run events across the UK. I used to be one of the committee members of the Manchester branch.
Okay.
And we used to run sort of like monthly networking events.
Yeah.
Some informal, some more formal presentations, that sort
Yeah.
of thing for people to get along to.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm conscious of time, but can I ask you one more question that I think is one of the weakest areas operationally, and I'm sure FM procurement colleagues can support the operational people on this, is around, you mentioned it already, mobilization. It's for me the success or failure of a new partnership, a new relationship, of a new supplier working with a client, and it's just so bad so often. Can you just, I'm throwing you on the spot here, but have you got just like some top tips on getting mobilization right? Just throw me a couple of things you can think of.
Are you talking from sort of client side procuring an FM service, or are we talking within the FM service provider organisation?
I don't actually mind how you look at it, because it's just such a dog's dinner. So I think anything would help people listening to think, oh yeah, I've not thought of that actually. And anything you could think of.
Yeah, so I guess my top tips, having very recent and current experience of mobilising some stuff, is having a thorough, detailed plan and understanding. Obviously, there's lots of bits, sort of work streams to mobilisation.
Yeah, of course.
The procurement bit is sometimes overlooked.
Yeah.
I've been on many contracts on sort of like the day before we were mobilising, and someone turns around and goes, "What about that service that's provided by that company?"
Yeah.
And it's not in the contract, it's not in the scope. No one's mentioned it until day dot, and then the procurement team are running around pulling their hair out, trying to come up with a solution. I think that is getting the procurement guys engaged from sort of like the bid process. If you were a service provider, if you're sort of one of the consultancy projects I'm working on at the minute, so we're the end client in this instance, we're going a bit further downstream. So we're talking to the provider about who they've got in place for certain disciplines, making sure they've got enough coverage, enough capacity, and sometimes insurance policies in terms of a second line supplier, maybe the old existing supplier that was there before, that knows the estate, knows the processes, probably got a lot of parts sat on the van for that specific item. So I feel like a good robust plan, but open dialogue with the ops guys is always helpful for mobilisation. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. I'll do an add-on if I can. I appreciate this is how long is a piece of string, but how long is a minimum amount of time you need for a mobilisation of perhaps something quite big? So let's say a service partner was leaving, another one was coming in. What is a reasonable mobilisation length?
So if we're talking sort of, again, integrated FM, TFM, I think anything shorter than 8 weeks is pretty aggressive. I think probably 12 to 16 is probably ideal and probably more standard. However, we have done them in much shorter periods when obviously things have gone wrong. Other competitors going bust, or just other circumstances beyond people's control where we've had to step in on contracts.
And then you're doing it on the hoof, and it's all a bit, you're always sort of on the back burner, but that's obviously not planned. So in your experience, minimum 12 to 16 weeks is what you want to be aiming for.
Yeah, that should be sufficient as long as you've got the resource levels right and you've got the right information at the start.
Love that. I've really found this actually quite enlightening. I mean, I sound surprised. I don't mean to sound surprised. What I mean is, I think you're absolutely right that there is too much focus on operational roles, whereas actually FM procurement is a really important role within FM. And like you said, I think it probably is misunderstood, overlooked. It's maybe like the less glamorous, sister or brother to the operational role, and it shouldn't be, should it? Because it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of explaining that. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your time and for your expertise, and I'm sure a lot of people will find this really, really useful to listen to. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.